G'day folks, my name's Gary, I'm 49 and I retired from Police Scotland in January this year. And today I'm going to take you all on a very personal journey. I don't take you on this journey to show off, I'm not looking for sympathy. What I'm looking to show folks is that mental ill health can affect any one of us at any given time. Okay? Obviously you'll see as we go through this, I've defied the professionals, and that's great. But please remember, it's always okay not to be okay. And sometimes taking that first step's the hardest. So sit down, buckle yourself in, let's go on a journey. Hi there folks, so a bit of background about myself. Growing up I had no mental health issues or symptoms whatsoever. I was a keen athlete and I did well at school. When I was 15 I was Fife Athlete of the Year. When I was 16 I was Deputy Head Boy at school. And when I was 17 I was an under 18 British professional sprint champion. Also at the age of 17 I joined the Police Cadets in Fife Constabulary and I got top exam marks in all my tests that year. In 1992 I joined the Regular Force, and in 1993 at the Scottish Police College I was awarded the Baton of Honour. With 5 years service I moved into the CID, and with 9 years service I was thinking of going for promotion. At that time I had a beautiful wife, a new house and a new car. Life was great, happy days. Okay, so I consider myself very fortunate to have been great friends with a colleague called Andy Tate, who I'm sure some of you remember. Andy was 27 at the time. He had no underlying health conditions. He had an under 18 cap for Scottish football. He was a keen golfer. He was in the drug squad at the time and he was very well thought of. He was a better looking, more trendy one of the two of us. And at that time he had a beautiful wife, a new house and a new car. Life was great for the two of us. Okay, so about 20 years ago, Andy and his wife and me and my wife went for a night out in Kirkcaldy. We had a brilliant night. Did we have too much to drink? Absolutely. Was it par for the course back then? Definitely. So we had our drinks and then we went back to Andy's house to stay the night. And at 2 o'clock in the morning we all went to bed. Now the last thing Andy said to me at 2 o'clock was, "Gaz, match the day in the morning." I says, "Andy, match the day in the morning, son." And we all went to bed. About 5 o'clock that morning, Andy's wife came through. She was in tears and couldn't wake him up. So she phoned an ambulance. I then went through and tried to resuscitate him, but that wasn't working. The ambulance crew arrived, they took over, they tried to resuscitate him. He was then placed in an ambulance and conveyed to the Victoria Hospital in Kirkcaldy. Now after about 10 minutes or so, Andy's family arrived, were taken into a room and were told the devastating news that Andy had died. It was awful. So I spent time with the family, then I spent time with the police, and I got home about 8:30 on the Sunday morning. Once I got home, the phone call started from Andy's colleagues phoning me to find out what had happened. They didn't want to burden the parents for obvious reasons, so they phoned myself, and I relived the events of that evening over and over and over again that entire day. It was tough. I wasn't eating properly, I wasn't sleeping right that night, and then, I'm not being melodramatic here, I'm being honest, I went back to work at 8 o'clock the next morning. What was I thinking? You know, you're young, you think you're invincible, so you throw yourself back into that working environment. Now later in that week on the Friday, a murder inquiry broke at Kirkcaldy, and I was involved in that heavily and really enjoyed it. But for the next 2 weeks I worked long hours, I wasn't eating properly, I wasn't sleeping right. Colleagues and supervisors at work were saying, "Gary, you're going to take some time out here, son." I'm like, no, I'm absolutely fine, I don't need to take any time out. I should have listened. After 2 weeks I suffered a nervous breakdown, then I was signed off work for 6 weeks with post-traumatic stress disorder. And folks, that was just the beginning. So my mental health then deteriorated rapidly over the next 6 weeks, culminating in me having no sense of reality. I had visual hallucinations, so I was seeing things that weren't there. I had audio hallucinations, so I had voices in my head that was absolutely off the scale. I actually remember going to a friend's wedding, and the hallucinations I had at that wedding were just phenomenal. So much so that we had to come away from the wedding about 7 o'clock that night, my wife and I, and we got home. As the evening progressed, my symptoms got worse and worse and worse, and my wife ended up having to contact an ambulance. I was then conveyed to the Queen Margaret Hospital in Dunfermline, where I was given a room on my own. When I was in that room for the first 24 hours, the hallucinations that I had were off the scale. Now the next part of the story is something my wife tells me about because I have no recollection of it whatsoever. Apparently what had happened is I was in bed, I freaked out, I jumped out of bed, I ran through a corridor, head first into a set of double doors. I was shouting, I was swearing, I was violent, I had no recollection of this whatever. That culminated in me being injected, knocked out, sectioned under the Mental Health Act and then detained in a psychiatric hospital, where for the first 2 weeks I was in a locked ward that was locked 24/7 and you were under constant supervision. At that time I actually thought I was in a prison because my room had bars across it. I had a bed, a side cabinet, there was a kitchen area, a living area, a showering area, everybody had a room, and I genuinely believed I was in prison. My mental health was off the scale. So much so that at the end of that 2 weeks, my wife and dad were taken to one side and told, Gary will never work again and you'll never have a family. Do you know what my wife said to that? She says, we'll see about that. So being in that psychiatric hospital for the first 2 weeks, I was then moved, still under a section, to another ward where I spent the next 3.5 months. And that ward was locked between 9 in the evening and 9 in the morning. Also at that time, for the next 3.5 months, my wife visited me in hospital for 6 hours a day, every day for the whole time. The level of support I had from her was absolutely phenomenal. Unknown to me, she was getting phone calls from work colleagues, family, friends, asking how I was doing, and everybody wanted to visit. But the reality of the situation was, I wasn't well enough for visitors. One of my supervisors, Lee Dixon, at the time, says to my wife, if we can't visit Gary, how can we help you? And she went, you can't help me, there's nothing you can do. And Lee says, well, if you leave your lawnmower out, I'll cut your grass. If you leave your grocery list out, I'll go to the supermarket. The level of support I had that time was absolutely phenomenal. So, I've been in hospital for the best part of 4 months. I was initially given home visits, so I was going home for around about maybe 3, 4, 5 hours a day, 2 or 3 times for that week. And then it culminated in me being released from section on a permanent basis, but that was very difficult. So I got home that night and everybody's thinking, great, Gary's home, but that night my mental health symptoms were off the scale again. So much so, my wife and dad had to take me back to hospital the next day. That was a tough car journey because nobody spoke, nobody wanted me going back in that environment. And once I got into that environment, I actually became a bit violent again. I've no recollection of this, and I had to be injected and sedated for a period of time. And that was tough. Thankfully, after another 3 or 4 days, I was released again, and this time it was to be on a permanent basis, which was brilliant, but that was tough. Coming home and the transition between the hospital and your home life was so difficult. I felt I became institutionalised in hospital, if that makes sense. And when I came home, things like getting out of your bed in the morning, having a shave, having a shower, having your breakfast, all these things were difficult for me. But eventually, in the fullness of time, I started to slowly get my life back into place. During that time, I had visits from the Force Welfare Officer, friends, family, work colleagues, work supervisors, psychiatrists, psychologists. The level of support that I had in those months was massive, but it did take me a long time to readjust to that life. My wife's love and support throughout that was unconditional. I'd never have got through it without her. My symptoms were audio and visual hallucinations, which is what we've already talked about. Depression, anxiety, stress, paranoia, suicidal thoughts, all that kind of stuff as well. As well as that, I also lost my driving licence for a year. Throughout the 6 months that I was off, I was desperate to get back to work in any capacity. And I'm not being funny here, I'd counted paper clips to get back to work. That's how desperate I was to get back into that working environment. Thankfully, I was fully supported by Police Scotland throughout this. And initially, they agreed that I should go back to work on a phased return. And I was basically told, you can pick and choose your hours. Now, because I lost my licence, they gave me a job in Dunfermline, which meant I could walk to my work, which is fantastic. So I did that. And what happened then was probably the course of the next 6 months, I gradually increased my hours. I was given some admin jobs, so I always felt there was a sense of worth when I was at my work. And slowly but surely I began to recover over the next 6 months. So much so that once my hours were back up to full-time hours, I was then given a job at crime desk at police headquarters in Glenrothes. That was, it wasn't public facing, it was restricted duties, and it was a great role for me to be in. And I did that role probably for about maybe 2 or 3 years. After being in that position for 2 or 3 years, I then moved into the intelligence world. I did various roles there, including working in the SID Bureau. I was family liaison case coordinator in the family liaison unit. I was an NPR controller for an NPR team, so always had a sense of worth. This is going to sound really cheesy, but ever since I got the bat in the honour at Police College, I always wanted to go back as a probationary instructor and teach the recruits. But with my mental health, there's no way I thought that was ever on the cards. However, I decided that I would get myself a cheeky wee secondment to see what it was like, and I got a week there. It was brilliant. I was watching officer safety getting trained, I was watching people taking classes, and then on the Friday, one of my colleagues did an input on the investigation of major crime. At the end of that input, he turned around and he says, Constable Will Fillen, from your days in the CID, have you got any stories about major crime you've been involved in you would like to share with the class? I says, well, I've got a murder inquiry that I was involved in from start to finish. If that's any good, that would be great. So I got up that day, I stood in front of this class, and I delivered a 20 to 30 minute input on this murder investigation. I came out of class that day, and I kid you not, I was absolutely buzzing. It had been one of the best weeks of my entire career. It was absolutely fantastic. I went home that night, my wife saw it in me, and she says, look, if a job comes up, what are you going to do? And I'm thinking, well, do I apply? Do I not apply? You know, can I cope with a job like that? Can I not cope with a job like that? And she says, look, what harm would it do if a job comes up for you to apply? And that's what I did. So I put a 600-word application together. Again, I hadn't done that for years, so that was tricky, with 6 different competencies. And I got through the paper sift. I then got an interview, and the beauty of the interview is the people that were interviewing me never knew my background, they just knew me for being Gary Gilfillan. I got through that interview and I got a job at the police college, and it turned out to be the most amazing achievement in my life. So the support that I received from my wife to undertake this role was absolutely phenomenal. She knew I'd be away working between Monday and Friday, and I'd only be home at the weekends, so she'd have to take care of the house and the kids. And the love and support that I got from her to do this was absolutely fantastic. So I then worked at the police college for the next 3 years, and it turned out to be the best 3 years of my career. I loved every minute of it. Going into class every day, I was buzzing, I was teaching for an hour and a half a time, it was great. Absolutely fantastic experience. I had a lot of mental health blips along the way, but I was looked after. I was working with people that cared. So if I was working on a day where I was struggling, my colleagues would come in and say, Gary, how's your day going? Ah, well, not so good today. Right, well, if you need me to take a class, I'm here for you. There was one boy, Adrian Kelly, who I was halfway through a class one day and I was having a bad day. And he came in halfway through, took me out and he went, you didn't look yourself this morning, Gary, how are you doing? I was like, struggling a bit. He says, well, do you want me to go in and take your class and you can go and have time out in your room? I says, yeah, that would be amazing. So in he walks, takes over the class, I went back to my room. That was one example, I could give you hundreds, because I worked with these most amazing people. In terms of the supervisors then, I remember teaching one day for most of the day, and at the end of that day, I had a wobble, went to see my sergeants, broke down in tears, and explained that I couldn't cope with working the whole day. And at that particular time, I thought my days of working at the college might be over. But far from it, my supervisor was brilliant, and she turned around to Jill Campbell and she says to me, Gary, if you can't teach a whole day, what we'll do is we'll put you in class in the morning, you can do admin stuff in the afternoon. So to get that level of support at the police college at that time was phenomenal. If I was studying in the evenings, then I would have people to guide me with my studies to help me prepare for the next day. If I wanted company, if I was having a bad night and I needed company, people were there for me. It was just a phenomenal time to work at the police college. I've got 2 things that I'm really proud of in my days at the college. The first thing is I undertook a diploma in leadership and development, and I passed that with distinction. That was tough because you're teaching during the day, you're studying for teaching at night, and then you're doing a diploma on top of that. So to cope with all that was fantastic. So another milestone for me that I was proud of at the college was when I delivered the 1.5 hour input on mental health to a number of students in the lecture theatre, which holds 200 folk. And when I was speaking that day, I always start the input with a story. I did that for all my teachers. I always started off with a story and then taught the stuff. So this was no different, but this time I told my personal story. Perhaps not in as much detail as I'm articulating with you guys today, but there was a story there nevertheless, and I always told that story first and then did the teaching, and that worked for me. At the end of the college, I would get cards from students, and the comments from the students and the cards were humbling, to say the least. And a lot of them thanked me for my open and frank and honest account of my mental health journey, and said thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for sharing that. So unfortunately in November 2020, things took a turn for worse for me at work. What had happened was there was students off for 2 weeks with COVID, and me and my colleague Davey Arnott had 4 days to teach them 2 weeks work. And I undertook far too many classes that week for my own good, culminating in me taking a teach on the Thursday afternoon. And when I was trying to deliver this input, I had voices in my head. At the end of the input, I said to Davey, "How was that?" And he says, "Gary, it was brilliant." I was like, "Really?" He's like, "Aye." So a couple of hours passed, and then about 4 o'clock that day, he saw I was struggling. So he's like, "Gary, you all right?" And I just broke down in tears in front of him. I couldn't cope. Went back to my room, cried for the best part of an hour. And the next morning, I broke down in tears again. I decided the best thing to do would be to take time off. So on the Monday, I phoned in to say I'd be taking some sick leave, and my supervisor, Susie Kelsey, couldn't have been any more supportive. She basically turned around and says, "Gary, I'm delighted to hear you're taking time out because we heard about your struggles on Friday and Thursday." She says, "If you'd been coming into work today, we probably would have been having an awkward conversation." And she says to me, "Just take as long as you need. We're always here if you need us." So I thought I'd be off for maybe, 1 week, 2 weeks, something like that. But 2 weeks quickly became a month, quickly became 6 months. During that time, and especially in the early days, the symptoms that I had were very strong. So I had voices in my head. I had this sort of depressive side, anxiety, stress, paranoia, suicidal thoughts. And I was lying in my bed for up to 2, 3, 4 hours a day. And then eventually, after being off for about 6 months, I made the very painful decision to go through ill health retirement, which is not something that I wanted to do. But ultimately I knew it was the right thing for me and the right thing for my family, so that's what I did. So what I'd like to say to you is, I've been to the Police Treatment Centre at Auchterarder on 2 occasions on a psychological and wellbeing programme, which is a 2-week programme up at the Auchterarder, and it was absolutely fantastic. I would encourage anybody that's got mental health issues, that's struggling to cope with day-to-day life, get yourself up there and go on this course because the rewards are massive. You get things like sleeping classes, mindfulness, Tai Chi, yoga, Pilates, you go for walks, you go for cycles, there's a swimming pool, a sauna, a steam room, there's a games room. If you want company, you can have company, but you go to that. If you don't want company, you don't have to have it. But I've been twice. You can go as a retired officer, and it's my intention to hopefully go back at some time in the future. So my condition then, folks, is called schizoaffective disorder, which is a mixture of schizophrenia and bipolar. And we've talked about the various symptoms that I've went through, with the voices being the toughest to deal with, and then anxiety, stress, paranoia, suicidal thoughts and such like. And what I would say is I would never have got to where I am today if it wasn't for the love and support from my amazing wife. So I've been a strong advocate for mental health over the years, and I told my story to See Me Scotland, a national mental health organisation, and they took parts of that DVD and put it on a training video, and that will roll out to employers to show them how people should be dealt with at work. I've also did work for Fife Constabulary, as it was known then, when I was on the Disability and Carers Association. I told my story on DVD there, and that was played out to an audience of about 100 people for various organisations. So you had your NHS, you had your fire service, doctors, student nurses, and the feedback I got for that was quite humbling. One of my most amazing achievements for me personally was about 1.5 years ago at the Houses of Parliament in Holyrood in Edinburgh. I delivered a 1-hour presentation on mental health in the workplace to MSPs and His Majesty's Inspectorate for Mental Health. And the feedback I got for that was absolutely phenomenal. I come out of that place that day and I was buzzing. I was so uplifted to be sharing my experience, how I'd been dealt with over the years by work, which has been absolutely fantastic. So for me, on a good day, I'll go to the gym, I'll meet friends for coffee, I'll go for a walk, I'll help with the kids, I'll do domestic chores, I will help friends, I'll help families. There's so many positive things I can do on a good day. The problem comes for me on a bad day, and at the moment I get bad days every 2 to 3 days. That's despite the fact that I take antipsychotic medication, antidepressants, I see a psychiatrist, I see a psychologist. On the subject of psychologists, that is the person that I offload all my crap onto. So everything negative that's going on in my life, how I'm struggling, what the voices say, how often I have the voices. And she sits down and listens and gives me coping strategies and mechanisms and signposts me to various organisations. So I consider myself very fortunate to have that support. The hardest thing to deal with is the voices. And people say, "Gary, what do the voices say?" All I can tell you is they're very dark, they're very intrusive, and they're exceptionally hard to live with. I could live with depressive, paranoia, anxiety, stress side of things. I can live with that and park that. What's more problematic for me is living with these voices, and it's just how it is and it always will be. If I get voices from at home, it's quite easy. I can just go up the stairs in my home environment, lie down and let them ride out. The problem comes when I have voices in a social situation. And I kid you not, I could give you hundreds of examples where I've had to take time out in a social situation, and it's not been easy. But the two examples I'll cite to you today are as follows. This year, to celebrate my retirement, me and my family and some friends went on a 2-week cruise in the Mediterranean. And one of the cities that I couldn't wait to explore was Barcelona. So we got on the hop-on, hop-off bus that day, we did a bit of sightseeing, we went on a cable car ride, then we got back on the bus, and as soon as we got back on the bus, I started to get voices in my head. Very troubled voices, let me tell you. And for the next 20 minutes, I had voices the whole time. We got back to the port. And my wife says, look, we're all going into the city centre, we're going to explore the place and we're going to have lunch. What do you want to do? And for the bottom of my heart, I wanted to go, but I knew I couldn't. And I says, look, I'm going to have to go back to the boat. And she went, if that works for you, Gary, just you do that. Because I've got that amazing understanding with my wife. So I got on the bus, voices all the way back to the ship, onto the ship, straight back into my room, closed the door, laid down and had voices for another 45 minutes. Another occasion was my son's 18th birthday, where we had a house full of folk, about 50 in our house, and about 6 o'clock that night I started to get voices. So I explained to my wife I was going to take time out, so I went upstairs. When I was upstairs, I could hear folk cheering my son for his birthday, saying, happy birthday Harry, cheers to Harry. And when all this was going on in the background, what was I doing? I wasn't a part of that, because of my mental health and my struggles. I'm so thankful to have had the opportunity to share my journey with the colleagues of P Division. The support I've received has been absolutely amazing to say the least, and it's great to be able to give something back. At the start of this video, I said it was okay not to be okay, and I mean that, most sincerely, and I'm living proof of that. This is me, and despite my challenges, I'm proud of who I am, I'm proud of my journey, both professionally and personally. Please remember folks, you're never alone. You have colleagues who will support you no matter what, and friends and family as well. Thanks very much for taking the time to hear my story, and if I've reached out to one person today that this helps, then I'll consider it a job well done. Take care of yourself. Goodbye.